Hello, welcome to my post-panel breakdown of finishing the Music Composition Speedrun Any % song. It was mostly done at the end of the panel. There were just a few things I wanted to change, such as the VSTs used. I wanted to use my professional quality VSTs that I have that I can only use on Cubase, which you're seeing in front of you, and not on Cubasis, which is a mobile version of Cubase. But being mobile means that it uses different types of VSTs, so I couldn't use these sounds there. And partly because I couldn't use these sounds there, I didn't add any choir during the panel because I could not and would not deal with that sound that it made. And I wasn't familiar enough with the unpitched percussion patch to be able to add any unpitched percussion. So here we go. So after I exported the Cubasis file and imported the MIDI tracks into Cubase, I swapped out the VSTs, fixed a couple like straggling tails, like in the piano part, for example, I want to make that legato. And I adjusted the velocities because they sounded fine with the kind of low-level entry quality instruments in Cubasis, but as soon as I put my professional quality VSTs on them, the instruments sounded like they were screaming because of how high all the velocities were. So I dropped that. I did a little bit more velocity-specific editing later, particularly in the Harp, for mixing purposes. And then as soon as I had the sounds in a decent place, I doubled the A section, which I mentioned at the end of the panel that I wanted to do. So I went ahead and did that. So this part is now doubled so that the A section is now equivalent in length to the B section. So as I said, all I did was make the piano legato with the tails. Nothing else needed to do there. Symphony, again, it's a very similar situation. I didn't have to do much. I just adjusted some octaves for what sounds best on like the actual instrument. I did make a few more changes, was here in the trumpet and French horn. So when I pulled up the two tracks like this in Cubase, I noticed that the trumpet overlapped the French horn, and they had unison notes. So I adjusted the trumpet so that its countermelody would always be harmonizing and not be unison ever with the horn, and also gave it slightly more motion because it just felt too static. I also adjusted the French horn melody a little bit. I added a chromatic lean at the very beginning, as well as this offbeat attack that you see right there of the rearticulation. That was just to add interest to the line. And then with that chromatic lean, it was also to help emphasize that initial entrance, as well as foreshadow the whole major-minor lean, because it starts on A natural, which is the major third of F major, but then also that A flat, which is the third in F minor, in order to foreshadow that whole major-minor modal mixture thing I have going on in this A section. I also added a breath in the middle of the line so that any future live horn players would be at least less mad at me for how long the line is. However, we are used to hearing trumpet as the melody instrument. We are used to hearing horn either as the melody instrument when there is no trumpet, or as supporting the trumpet when it has the melody. I'm doing the opposite here. The French horn has the melody, and the trumpet has the counter melody. So in order to really help the French horn hold its own against the trumpet, not only with some mixing, I also added a choir. And this choir part not only doubles the melody, it also adds an octave up, as well as some internal harmonies. Helps the melody stand on its own a little better, and, epic choir as epic. So here's what those three parts sound like together. So the last thing that is A section specific that I did was I added my unpitched percussion. And so I have a snare drum with a slightly marchy rhythm. I have crash cymbals emphasizing the major section changes within the A section. Suspended cymbal bridging the gap between the A section and the B section, as well as leading into those suspended cymbal crashes. The bass drum has its own rhythm that complements the snare drum and also hits every time the timpani does, just to help give that more impact and more boom. So here's what all of the percussion sounds like together. So that was all of the A section specific things. Now, specifically for the B section, I didn't do much, the ocarina and the acoustic guitar. All I did was add a little chromatic gesture here in the guitar and a breath here in the ocarina. So nothing much really needed to be done there. Again, it's just a very thinner texture, so there were fewer things to even mess with or adjust. Let's talk about the harp. So harps, if you're not aware, have 7 strings per octave. That means that they have to retune every time there's an accidental. I had to go through and double check that all of my tunings were possible. Luckily, they were. In the transition between the A section, which is in F major, 1 flat, and the B section, which is in A major, 3 sharps, I did cut out this last note in the A section just to try to buy the harpist a little bit more time to make the couple of tuning changes necessary going into this section. And then similarly, right at the end of the B section, as we are transitioning back into the A section and the key of F major. Otherwise, all I did was add the bottom octave that I had missed in the panel at the very end of the B section and doubled the A section's pattern an octave lower, so that just helps that motion come through, because that's one of the few parts that has motion, and that just helps it really just sing through better. So that is the harp. And now you may have noticed that there are way more strings than there was in the Cubasis version. Because I was writing on the keyboard, I was stuck with what my 2 hands could physically reach at a time. And writing quickly, I wasn't too concerned about dealing with that. As soon as I had more time, I split out the strings to make a properly orchestrated string part. So I added higher octaves to fill out the parts better. I added a couple of lower octave notes to just really ground this deep. And I had some fifths in the low end that I pulled out because it is way too muddy to have that. It is too low. I also didn't need that like I did in the thin keyboard sketch version to give the illusion of thickness and fullness anymore. And then in the B section, I didn't do any of that. I left it as it was because I wanted the nice thin texture there. So as you can see, in the A section, first, seconds, violas, cellos, and contrabasses all have 2 parts pretty much the entire time. So we have 10 string lines going. And then we have no contrabasses or first violins. Second violins are split into 2 parts, but violas and cellos only have 1 line each in the B section. Really thins out the texture, as well as going from bowed to pizzicato. It's a just really nice contrast. I did, however, during the panel, forget to add these last 2 measures, so I went ahead and did that. You might also notice that I have my split out version down here, but I also have a master patch, per se, up here. I did that because a mixing trick, especially when dealing with virtual instruments, is if you combine 2 different libraries, especially if those libraries happen to be from different companies, because the players are different, the space they were recorded in is different, the mics used are different, the post-production is different, it sounds just a little bit different. And if you mix those together, you actually get a more realistic, nuanced sound. So I just combined all of this split out action back down into master patch that I just did as a full string ensemble. And then I threw it way down in the mix. You can see over here. And then I could actually balance the violins versus the contrabasses versus the violas and all that good stuff. Then with my split out version, and then my full string patch could just kind of sit in the background and just bolster that sound a little bit. That helped especially when it thins out so much in the B section. It helps the strings not sound too thin, because you can hear the pizzicato on my master patch better than you can when it's Ioco in the A section. And it just helps widen that whole string section sound here. Hear the difference? So with that, I'll leave you with the final playthrough. Thank you so much for coming along with this, and enjoy Prelude to an Adventure.